Okay, what's up, guys? We're going to do Euthalius, Greek Theologian, a reading from Antiquity Unveiled. We're on page 61, and we're going to 64. So again, this is Euthalius, and that's Euthalius, and he was a Greek theologian, and we're going to hear his spirit testimony right now. Good evening, sir. My name was Euthalius of Alexandria. I lived in the 5th century and was a commentator on the Pauline epistles. Those epistles are those which were brought from India by Apollonius and obtained by the later through the king of Pharaohs of Taxilia. The gospel, according to Matthew, is not original, but is of Armenian origin. The gospel, according to St. Mark, was left by Apollonius with the Thessalonians according to the text of the epistle to them. The gospel according to St. Luke is but a modified version of the legend of Prometheus, bound as rendered by Lucian and Marcion at Rome. That's Prometheus on the Skag, we take. The gospel according to St. John was written by Apollonius of Tyana toward the latter part of his life, when he was an old man on the islands of Patmos, where he retired to end his days in isolation from the human race. The gospel is a blending with what the inspired seer hoped for and the knowledge which he feared to impart in such terms as uneducated mortals could understand. The Acts of the Apostles relate to the doings of Apollonius and his disciples, and this was fully understood by the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists up to the time of Eusebius of Caesarea. That's Caesarea. Ammonius Saccas, Ammonius, and that's Saccas. Ammonius Saccas, Plotinus, and their followers were gymnosophists, Gnostics and Neoplatonists combined. They had no idea nor intention of promulgating anything but what they regarded as truth. Truer or better men than were Ammonius and Plotinus never lived. This was made plain to me by the study of their writings. Apollonius, Ammonius, and Plotinus were the purest and best men, and their only desire was to elevate the human race. Their teachings had relation to the Brahmanical and Buddhistic canonical narratives concerning the Indian savior Krishna. I now see an ethereal spirit of light which appears behind and over you. These words were, and this is in parentheses, these words were addressed to us, who says he is Krishna, of whom the story of his divine origin, persecution by the tyrant Kansa, K-N-S-A, and miraculous performances were exaggerations, and that his sole work was that of a mortal reformer, and his only object to make the people of his country happy. For these services he was worshipped and regarded as an incarnation of Brahma, or the spirit of the universe. He shows me the figure 3 repeated 4 times, by which I understand him to imply that he was born 3333 BC in India at the foot of a mountain near Mathura, and that's Mathura, on Juna, Junna. Parentheses, we remarked we had always supposed Krishna to have been a myth. Answer, no, he was a man, and the original of all the world's modern saviors. The canonical epistles, as far as I knew anything about them, were all derived from the writings of Apollonius of Tyana, who, to conceal that fact, has been called Paul or Paulus. The names of James, Peter, John, and Jude were attached to the other epistles sent to the communities too insignificant to be mentioned. All these teachings were appropriated, either successfully or unsuccessfully, by Eusebius of Caesarea to make good his theological Christian scheme. But he is failing in his purpose to some extent, and I seeing that was a grand opportunity for me to gain renown, acknowledge their authority, and set about establishing what Eusebius had failed to prove true regarding them from his standpoint. I put these Indian writings of Apollonius into my own shape and eliminated from them every mention of Apollonius or Chrishna, and substituted therefore Paul and the Christ idea. This work of Eusebius and myself became the better assured in the proportion as the original writings and traces of them became destroyed. What I have told you is the truth. Okay, and that was Euthalius, a Greek theologian. We refer to account of Euthalius to Nouvelle Biographie Générale, and it says here, according to the spirit statement of Euthalius, it is very certain that the Gospels of Matthew and John were both the production of Apollonius of Tyana, the former written at an early period of his career and closely in accordance with the gymnosophic theology or philosophy, and the latter near the close of his life after he had matured his theological conceptions. There is no doubt that the theological and philosophical views of Apollonius underwent very material modifications as he advanced in his realization of the spiritual department of the natural forces and causes, and hence the spiritual nature of the latter gospel as compared with the crude and less spiritually developed characteristics of the first or original gospel of his adoption. There is a singular analogy between the name of Apollonius and John. They are both designations of the light that lighteth all men coming into the world, the sun. The sun among the Greeks was alike designated Apollo and Ion. Ion, the Greek name of the sun, etymologically speaking, I, the one, and on, the being, the one being. Eusebius and his successors, who have labored so hard to deprive Apollonius of the credit of his theological labors, have substituted Ion or John for Apollonius. In view of all the facts, we are led to credit the spirit statement of Euthalius and to accept his statement that Apollonius wrote the Gospel of St. John, as it is called, on the island of Patmos, where we are also under spirit control, wrote Revelations. The spirit of Euthalius tells us that the Acts of the Apostles relate the doings of Apollonius and his disciples, and that this was fully understood by the Gnostics and Neoplatonists up to the time of Eusebius, AD 325 to 350. This is undoubtedly the fact, since Saul or Tarsus or St. Paul was no other individual than Apollonius of Tyana himself. Ammonius Saccas, Plotinus, and Porphyry were undoubtedly Gnostic followers of Apollonius, and all were what Euthalius testifies they were, as good and pure men as ever lived. It is almost certain that the divine incarnation in Apollonius's system of philosophy and theology was Chrishna of the Hindu theologies, called Christos in the Greek language, and known in the various other languages by still other titles, as will be found in other communications. This spirit says that the canonical epistles, so far as he knew anything about them, were all derived from the writings of Apollonius of Tyana, and that to conceal their real authorship, Eusebius attributed them to Paul, or Paulus, which was but a modification of Pol, P-O-L, the abbreviated name of Apollonius. Euthalius tells us that Eusebius did not perfectly succeed in robbing Apollonius of the credit of his labors, and that he, Euthalius, completed that work. That he, Euthalius, completed that work. Where was I at? In view of the facts that Euthalius is acknowledged to have broken the epistles, canonical and Catholic, and the Acts of the Apostles into chapters and verses, in order to add to the contents of the chapters, as it is also admitted historically, on the testimony of Euthalius himself, that he collated them with the copies in the library of Eusebius Pamphilius at Caesarea. There can be no doubt he was fully acquainted with the alterations that had been made from the originals by Eusebius. Indeed, he tells us that the Indian writings of Apollonius were at the time in the Pamphilian library at Caesarea, and that he modified them to suit himself, and eliminated from them the names of Apollonius and Chrishna, and substituted therefore Paul and the Christ idea. Right.